hello to the attendees. So what we're going to do today is basically, it's the exercise portion of the training. So you'll take what you had a chance to kind of see in action yesterday and try it out for yourself. Now, there's 3 parts to this exercise. The first part you'll recognize from the previous day's tutorial, which is loading up this new MNIST data set, exploring it, massaging it a little bit, and also kind of visualizing it using PCA and Tisney, and I think you'll find that one a little bit more interesting. And that'll be the first third. Then the middle third, which will give you a little less time, like 15 to 20 minutes for you to do, is where you get to create your own model yourself. And so basically it's a chance to test your knowledge and what you've picked up from the tutorials previously. And also to experiment with some different things, some different hyperparameters, maybe a different optimizer, and just to get a sense. This is a smaller data set, and it should train faster. You'll see how that goes. The final third, which we'll do, has to do with a Kaggle a contest, and it's the digit recognizer contest. So Kaggle is a Google supported, owned community for data scientists that hosts a variety of resources, including competitions and data sets and examples. And it's a way for the community to kind of share their knowledge for machine learning, and challenge each other to improve their models. And so one of the contests that they have that's kind of always running is the digit recognizer, which uses a very famous MNIST digit database. Basically, this database was, I believe, created originally to help with automatically reading, postal codes and addresses and the numbers on the postal codes in the U.S. Or I guess, and they're called zip codes. To Canada's postal codes. So it's to read the zip codes. And of course, when people write them, all sorts of different styles and with the right letters. And if you want to create an automatic system to recognize them, it helps to have lots of data. And that's where that data set came from originally. And so we're going to use it instead of the CFAR10 data set, so the number of categories is the same, but now they're digits, 0 to 9. And so what I'm going to have you do is in the chat, I'm going to pass along this link, which is the link to the tutorial, and I'm also going to pass along the link to the exercise. Give me 1 second here. So today we will be doing the exercise. So hello to the attendees. This is good. We now have some more. So so there's a link there that if you open it up, and I'm going to go and share my screen now. We're going to open up in Colab. So give me a second here. Okay. So what you should now see is basically the repository, and I'm going to go to basically where I have loaded it in Colab. So you can tell you're the right one if it says deep learning exercise with MNIST and Keras. Okay, so so if you do have a problem, please make if your Colab isn't up right now, please let us know in the Q&A, which I think is the only interaction you have. I don't think that you can actually put anything in the chat. So one of the issues today, by the way, just for the attendees, is that we're running this Zoom session as a webinar. So there's some interactive capabilities that we're missing, like the ability for breakout rooms and for you to share screens. If you get stuck, like really stuck, and we have to kind of work something through with you later on, we'll find some other way, maybe send you like a different link that you can kind of go to briefly. But for now, we'll try to, you put your questions in the Q&A, and David Poog, who's a data scientist at KVL, will be around to help you. So just as last time, as yesterday, we want to make sure that our collab session is the runtime is going to use a GPU. So we're going to go down to runtime, change runtime type, and for the hardware accelerator, we're going to specify GPU, okay? And then I'm going to save. So let me see here. And what I see, up here is that I haven't yet really connected to the Jupyter kernel, so it hasn't really launched yet. But as soon as I start running some code, it will launch. So let's try this first cell. So we remember that, I think it was Shift-Enter for Mac and Windows, or, okay, yes, and of course run anyway. Yes, we will run it anyway. And it's going to start a Jupyter kernel in the background, which is going to basically have our running Python. And you can see actually up in the corner, it says initializing, and there it's connected. And now it runs, and well, it doesn't say anything, but it did work. So similar to last time, we're going to kind of try to load our data set, again, using Keras's load data set functionality. But there's some helper functions here we don't have to worry about. They're just for different ways that we could kind of load and verify that we have the data and the models. And the first thing we'll do is, perfect. So if we see that the downloading from Google APIs, Keras, the MNIST, that's good. Okay, so at this point here, could I verify that people have actually seen downloading data and have the data there? So if you don't, please in this Q&A said not yet or whatever, and if you got it, please maybe just say yep, and I'll go and check the chat. Cool. So looks like we've got it. Let's go to the next step. Again, like last time, we're going to import a bunch of system and Python libraries, pandas and numpy and matplotlib. So we were familiar with numpy and matplotlib previously, so numpy was kind of a Python math library, very ubiquitous in the data sciences, and we used that. Basically, our data sets previously were in kind of numpy array formats, and we used matplotlib to do the plotting and all nice kind of graphs and so on. We're also going to use a data science tool called pandas this time, which lets us kind of work with table format data and CSV data, and which we will need later on when we submit to Kaggle and use their version of the data set. So let's run these imports. That worked. We'll load up TensorFlow and Keras, just as we did last time. We'll also set matplotlib to be inline so that we basically get the graphs showing immediately afterwards. And we're just going to verify here that we actually do have a GPU, and it's just kind of what our environment is set up as. And we see, yes, we're in Colab, decent new versions of TensorFlow and Python. And yes, the important part, we do have a physical GPU. So if you've got that, we're good. It's kind of like yesterday. If you don't, you'll have to go back to the beginning and change the runtime of the GPU and then restart the kernel. And then get this. And so if you are don't have a GPU and have to catch up, just let us know. So actually, we've already downloaded the data set. It's here. The data set's quite small. We're going to load it entirely in memory. And we're going to have to start exploring it. And this can see a little bit about what its shape is and so on. Let's just run our cache, make sure it's there. Ignore the failed. But if we run the find, we find it. So it's in our Keras datasets directory. And similar to before, I'm going to create some helper functions, basically turning the index label into the index into labels. Well, in this case, so yesterday the label values were like 0 to 9, but what they represented was things like automobiles and cats and dogs and deers. But in this case, 0 to 9 represents 0 to 9. So I'm just going to basically just say convert it to an int just to be sure. And then I'm going to basically have these other helper functions that let us pull out the label values from different sorts of array or outputs that we could get, and they just get used in the code later on. So we'll run that. So these are just helper functions, and okay, just ignore that one. That's let's double check that it's there. Okay, now we're going to try to load it, and no complaints. And basically similar to yesterday when we had like the CFAR10 load data, and we basically we returned 2 tuples. Each tuple was, the first tuple was the training data set, and then the second tuple was the test data set. And then the data sets themselves are split into 2 parts. There's the input, the X values, and then there's the Y labels output. And what we're trying to do is basically learn how to basically calculate Y values from X values. So it's basically creating a complex function. This second one, the second cell, if I run it, just tries, just verifies that the data is there, and if not, tries a second data source. But in this case, data is loaded, so we're good. And similar to last time, we're going to just try to explore that data, find out what its types are, its sizes are, its shape is. And so we see that their training data set, it's numpy arrays, just as yesterday. We see that the data type for the X is unsigned int 8, similar to yesterday. So integer values from 0 to 255. Same for the Y. Of course, we don't use all of those. We also see the shape. And so we see that we have 60,000 examples, but there's a little something different about the shape of each of the image. It's actually 28 by 28 instead of 32 by 32. And because it's grayscale, there is only one dimension, and it actually doesn't show up here as part of that shape. So it's actually a 2-dimensional shape, whereas when we deal with images, when we have like red, green, blue in the different channels, that would be 3-dimensional. And so we sometimes have to convert from this 2-dimensional into 3-dimensional with kind of like a dummy color dimension to make things like matplotlib happy and the networks of themselves. But we'll see what happens with that. We also see that the Y-train shape is basically the same number of examples, and similar with the test shapes. We see that there's only 10,000 examples, but the size of the images there is the same. So let's kind of get a sense of what the min, max, the range of these values is. And if we run this cell, we see that on the X values, the min and max, 0 black, 255 white. Interestingly, the mean value is not quite in the middle of those like last time. So that kind of means that there's a lot more darker space. So as we'll see why shortly. And for the training labels, we see that basically they're going to just use the numbers from 0 to 9. So that's the maximum. I'm going to create some helper functions here. One of them is to convert this to image. Basically helps to reshape the arrays that we get to make them, to kind of give us this dummy third dimension, and to make the network, the input, happy, and to make matplotlib happy as well. So and then of course we'll have the ability to kind of plot a bunch of these images. And now we're going to basically see what the training set looks like. Ta-da. Okay, let me just check this. So what I'll do is I'll let you do that, but okay, perfect. So I'll let you do that, and but I'll still go ahead, and there'll be like a pause in the middle. Well, you'll be able to catch up. So awesome. Okay, thank you very much. That's good. Okay, so where were we here? Okay, we've been exploring the data set. Okay, and we kind of plotted it out so that we can actually see what it looks like. And you can get a sense of the variety of images. You can certainly see, let's look if we can find some interesting things here. Of course, sevens, there's a lot of different ways to do sevens. Someone put a little serif at the end of this one. This 5, well, there's hardly a loop at the bottom. Let's see what else. This, well, yeah. So this is a 9, although it could be a G, but it's a 9, and you compare it to a 9 like this, and there's this 3 here. It almost closes up. You could almost think of it like maybe a sloppy 8 that could be an issue for the recognizer, but that gives you kind of a sense of what that data set looks like. Let's go and plot the histograms as we have previously. And that first, so that basically that we defined the histogram plot. And now we're going to look at the values that we get. So what we see is that the number of samples that we have for each of the categories varies a little bit. So like we have more examples of 1s than we do, for example, of 5s. But it's not terribly bad. Like yesterday, the data set everything was the same, but this is still reasonable. The other interesting thing about the histogram is that you see there's a lot of blacks. That's kind of the major one, and then most of the other colors, or the grays, are kind of bright white grays, which kind of matches what we see here. Yes, you see kind of gray around the edges of this thing, but mostly a lot of black and a little bit of kind of very, very bright colors. So the other thing that we have to do is you just verify that our test set matches our data set. And so we're going to run this on the test set, and we see basically similar looking histograms. But David had mentioned yesterday, another interesting thing that we could do is we could actually compare the histograms and the data distributions per category, just to make sure that at the category level, they were kind of matching up. But, okay, so now let's go and kind of, so we're trying to make a function basically that, given some X, which is an image, can we produce a Y, which is the digit? And so we have a representation for the images in this 28 by 28 image space. And we would kind of maybe want to get a sense of, how close is this original representation to the final one? Can we kind of find interesting clusters? And we're going to use the PCA analysis that we did yesterday, but we're going to run it on this data set instead. So we've calculated the PCA features. We're going to define our plot function. And now we're going to take our first kind of look. So these are the components of the PCA analysis. And remember how yesterday, so remember our discussion yesterday about, this is an alternate representation. Basically, you've changed the basis dimensions for the representational space, starting with the one that has the most variance. And you can basically, in this space, you can use this vector space to represent any of the images that you saw previously. But the neat thing about this is that the further along, the further along we get with the components, the initial components are kind of the most important features that to creating the images. As we continue to the higher components, they have basically represent more details. And at some point, we could actually kind of cut those details off and still be close enough. What we see here is that probably the most important thing going on is kind of this overall, round shape. Things like zeros and eights have this. And even things like maybe fives and nines and threes, for example, they may not be fully rounded, but they have this, and then you can maybe remove some of the missing pieces. And then we start to see things like maybe things that look a little bit like the 9, but remove some of these other areas, or things that look kind of threes, and we start to see kind of the kind of primary shapes. And then as we kind of continue along looking at the components, the higher we go, the less information that they bring and the more details that they add to a representation. Let's look, if we do a scatter plot of the first 2 major components, what do we get? So I'm just going to create our helper functions for doing the plot for 3D and 2D, and let's try to visualize that. Okay, so interestingly, we still see overlap in the same way that we did previously. So we're looking at basically just among these first 2 dimensions, which are kind of the 2 major dimensions, and we're kind of taking this data set and compressing it down into 2 dimensions using these principal components, just the first 2. And we see that, yeah, to some degree, it kind of separates. Certainly ones seem to be quite by themselves. And we see so red, that would be like the 3s, kind of in this area. And then here, like 7, 9, what else do we have in this area? Zeros kind of in this area. They're not completely separated, but they're starting to. Let's look at a 3D plot for that, and basically adds one more extra component dimension to this, and you can kind of see the start of a separation into categories. So in this representational space, we wouldn't be able to cut a nice line or plane through it and section out the categories of interest. But we see that it's not quite as complex as the image data set that we were looking at yesterday. Let's see what Tisney provides. So remember that Tisney separated basically looked for locality based on your neighbors as opposed to just raw distance in that dimensional space. And again, Tisney a little bit slower, so we're only going to sample 10% of the original space. And then we're going to try to create our embedding from this.
Hey, Glendon.
Yes. Yeah.
Just while Tisney is running, so one of the things with that I've found with the MNIST data sets, because they have white letters on a black background.
Mm-hmm.
A good way to make sure that your model is actually learning to identify the digits and not learning just the aggressive contrast between black background and white digit is to actually create extra training data by reversing the contrast, to have it be a black digit on a white background, and maybe even throw in some like rotations or things like that to create more training data. It's something that works really well on MNIST and other on other classification problems as well.
Cool, awesome. So actually, that's kind of interesting because when we get involved, thanks, David. So when you get the data set that that Kaggle provides, it isn't complete, and then they in fact don't give a test set either. So we're going to reuse ours later on just to kind of get a sense of how our model trained on their data. But so David's suggestion to basically augment the data in a variety of interesting ways, like reversing it and tweaking it by little rotations or little bits of scaling, is an interesting way to basically improve the generality of the final model that we'll train. So that's cool. Thank you. So now let's go and see what Tisney tells us about our data. And I think this is kind of cool, actually. So using simply from the image space in that almost 900 dimensional space, a pixel space, using simply looking at kind of nearest neighbors and trying to preserve that the neighborhood relationships, we can actually start to pull out the categories quite nicely. We can certainly kind of like draw little circles around that, maybe cut them by planes. So we would have, like, for example, to separate, what is this, the 5 from the 3. So interestingly, the 5 has that loop at the bottom, kind of like the 3 does. We would maybe have to, it's not like a single plane, but you can kind of see how you can kind of separate out even this just 2D space. The categories kind of fall out from that. Now, Tisney is purely for visualization. If you ran this again, the clusters might show up in different regions, but it kind of gives us a sense of the complexity of this data set or its simplicity. So I'm going to skip over the 3D one. You can try running it later on your own, but just to get to where we need to be, I'm going to skip ahead to the data conversion. So remember that last time the data set was in uint, and we want to end from 0 to 255, and we had the categories encoded as numbers, but we wanted to turn those labels into one-hot encodings. That's basically what's happening here. So the first thing we're going to do is basically figure out the number of classes, which we kind of do based off of the min and the max of the training set. And so then we create the one-hot encodings using the Keras utilities to categorical. And then we're going to reshape the training and the test data. And the reason for that is we want to add that extra dimension. Basically, it's like that dummy third dimension, just to make the network happy. And so let's run those. So 10 classes as we expected. And now we've basically reshaped it from 2-dimensional images to 3-dimensional. We're now going to normalize it into going from, we want it to go in a 0 to 1 range instead of a 0 to 255 range. So here's the normalization step. And we're going to look at, so now the data types are floats, and the arrays are now three-dimensional images, even if that color dimension only has one dimension. And the training data for both, and so the labels for both train and test are now one hot encoded, so they're of size 10. So let's go and just, we're now getting to the part where we're going to create our model, but before then, we want to just define our helper functions for doing the plots. Okay, and now this part here, we're now at create your own classifier. So there's a bunch of to-dos in this cell. You see the hyperparameters, which, you know, I've just put some values in there. You can fiddle around with those if you'd like. And there's also, you can create your model, so that there's the function that we'll call. And so I've started out with a sequential model. So you remember that that was the very simple one from yesterday that forms one layer after another. And we can simply go model add, and then whatever new layer that we need. So you can create your model here. So you can, you know, look at the notebook from yesterday, and let me just go, and I'll just put a link to that notebook. This is the tutorial notebook. And you can view it on GitHub. Actually, let me. Yeah. So I'll put this in the chat. So this is the notebook. It's not completed. It's not running in Colab. You can't run it, but you can kind of see the previous examples and maybe use that for some inspiration. And so yes, so you'll basically create your model here. We also have a function to create your compiled model. And what it does is it calls the create my model function to create the model. And then you're going to have to add some, you know, model compile code there. So that was the code that basically turned the description of your model, which was a description of layer after layer after layer, typically like, you know, the weights layer, the layer type, then the activation, weights, activation, that sort of thing. And then it compiles it into whatever backend, in this case, TensorFlow. And at this point, you also specify what sort of optimizer you want to use as well. And what I have done is I've also included Atom here. Previously, you tried RMS prop. Atom is another momentum-based optimizer kind of in the family, and has some nice, it's a very easy to use, fairly performant optimizer as well. So if you add these codes in, then what will happen is that once you're done there, you can basically go ahead and run these other cells. This cell here will basically create your compiled model. It'll print out a summary for you so you can see what layers are there and how many weights you have to train. And then this cell will actually run the training. We're passing in the training data and the labels, our batch size, our epochs, and the validation data set, and similar to yesterday. And then you can plot out the history of how it performs over each epoch and plots on the predictions. And so what I'll do is I will give you like 15 minutes to kind of try that out. And what we'll do is we'll come back at 10 o'clock and then start on the Kaggle exercise part, and I'll walk you through that. So I'll let you go until 10 o'clock. If you do have questions or encounter issues or whatever, please, leave a message in a question, or, because all of you can talk, you can just open up your mic and ask as well. So I'll let you experiment with that for now, and then I will be back at 10. Okay, hello everyone. So how's it going? Were you able to get a working example? So if you may just put it in the Q&A, if you're we're able to get something working, that would be great. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of continue. I'll show you what I did. So I basically copied some of the code from the previous day's session, and it worked as is. So I created that simple convolutional neural network that we had previously. That was our second network, but the first complete one that was kind of all made by us and trained from scratch. And so that code I filled in here. And then for the compile, I basically used the previous example that we had seen, the previous example that we had seen. Let me just double check chat. And I used the same optimizer that we had used previously as well. And that was the only changes that I made to that cell. And then I ran the next cells. I see my summary that the network looks similar to the one yesterday, that it has about just under 1 million total parameters. And I then trained it. The number of epochs that we trained over, at least by default, was only 12. And we see basically, it's pretty quick, but very quickly, the network kind of converges to near 100% accuracy, like 0.9938. So, and the loss, so basically the loss in both the test and the training and the test, very similar. So, we have generalized well, our accuracy is great, awesome network. And we can evaluate a little bit the predictions, it's done a great job here. And in my case, it got all these correct. If we look at the classifier probabilities, we see that the certainty levels that it has, basically for which category the X data is in, very high. There's no doubt there. Remember yesterday's example, even when it got the correct answer, sometimes it wasn't quite sure if it could be some other category. And here we have, a high degree of certainty as well in these examples. So with that, we're now ready to begin with competing in the Kaggle digit recognizer competition. So the first thing is to get a Kaggle account. Now the cool thing is that Kaggle, I think it's owned by Google, and you can log in using your Google credentials. So let's go and, so I've already logged in, but if you were to click on this link here, you would have an option of using your Google credentials, and so you can just log in with Google, your Google account directly. So because in your collab, you're probably running within within your Google account. Then when you click on that link, you should already be logged into Google. So what I'd like you to do is log in to Kaggle using either your previous credentials or just use your Google account. And if you could let me know, let's give you like just a few minutes to do that. And if you could let me know when you are successfully into that account, and I'll show you what that screen should look like. Basically, but with your name instead of mine. Um, the important thing is going to be at the top right-hand corner, this little goose. The important thing is that your account information is here. And in a moment, after you've logged in, we'll want to go to your profile and create keys. So I'm going to leave that up for a second. I'm going to sign in here. And I can sign in with Google. Boom, I'm back. So hopefully you are now here. I'm going to assume I haven't heard nay or yay. So I'll assume that you're in. Let's talk about the next thing that we need. So we need so we want to communicate from this notebook with Kaggle, with Kaggle. I pronounce that in a funny way. So with Kaggle, and to do this, we need to get API credentials. And so basically it's going to be like a username and a key. And so the great thing about the key is that it's going to let you access your account, but it's temporary, because you don't want to put your actual credentials in here, because then, if you, for example, save this notebook somewhere on the web, someone else could come along and just look at it. But with your credentials, but with these API credentials, which are temporary, you can basically create them and then revoke them. And so here's what we're going to do. So we're going to go to the account tab, and then go to the user profile and create new API token from the API section. So here's what we're going to do. So in Kaggle, we go to this top right-hand section where we can go to our information, our content information. We go to your profile, and we now get this screen right here. The important bit is, I think, account. Perfect. So if you click on account here, you will scroll down, and you can go click on the API section. So if you click on create new API token, it will download a file called a JSON, so a Kaggle.json, and that is just a text file. So what you can do is, so here I'm on the Mac. So it wants to open it up in, for me, it wants to open it up in, what does it want to open up in? It wants to open up in Xcode. No, thank you. TextEdit is a perfect app to open it up in. And what you're going to see is just a little bit of text. It's in JSON format, which is JavaScript object format. And it's like kind of like a key value pairs. And so you see, the key is username, and then there's a value in quotes. And then there's key as a, the key as key in quotes. And then the value is a whole bunch of letters and digits. Everyone should be different, okay? And what we're going to do is you're going to need to copy and paste these values into here. So let me show you where you will do that. So you see in this cell right here, it's a bash cell, and basically you're going to run, there's a Kaggle command installed in Google Colab, which lets you kind of interact with Kaggle and the competitions. And so what we're going to do is we're going to basically download from the digit recognizer competition the data set. But to do that, you have to do it as yourself. And so what you need to do is you need to take this part here where it says your username, and you need to copy out the username value from that JSON file and put it in here in your notebook. And then the part that says your API key, you will copy out the value that was in that JSON file for the key. So it would look like a whole bunch of letters and digits and numbers, right? Once you've done that, and you'll need the quotation marks around them, you can then just run this cell, and what will happen is you will get something like this, where it says downloading sample submission to a particular directory. And then afterwards, you can run this cell, which basically, because it downloads a zip file and you want to extract that zip to get the different CSV files that are in there. So CSV, comma, separated values, kind of a standard kind of text-based format for tabular data. So if you could let me know if you, in the chat, actually, sorry, in the Q&A, if you succeed here, and if you're able to get to the part where it extracts the archive, and you see something like this here, please let me know. And if you're stuck with something, if you could also maybe put that in the Q&A. So I'll just wait for a few minutes to, and you can also, you know, unmute and just ask questions, and run this this cell, and you would get code similar to this. And then afterwards, you'd run the cell to extract the data. Now there's another cell that you can run afterwards. You can run this one here. So it downloads the data from an alternate place. Or this is just a helper function to do that. Run this, make sure it's cached and available, and the data is in the right place. And now we're ready to submit to Kaggle. So if you're not ready for this, you know, just please say, hold on in the Q&A, or unmute and ask for some help. But if not, we're going to go ahead. We have about 15 minutes left to explore this data set. So the first thing is that this data set is in CSV format. And so this in CSV format, comma separated values, the first line, so it's text-based, that first line is the kind of the labels. And here we see the labels for the columns. So the first label, column 1, is the label, which is actually kind of the head values. So is the category values. Let me just print out a few more lines here instead. Print out 5 lines instead. Okay, so so here we see that so this head command is it's a bash command, and it just lets us look at, like, in this case, the first 5 lines of the file. We see the first one is the column labels, and very inefficiently, it's, you know, every pixel up to 768 or whatever it is has a name, and then it has a number. It's all text, and we see that the first column is the label. So that first column, at least for the training data, is the label, the category that this image is in. Now notice that the test data does not have this. So, you know, previously our test set had the labels, and that's how we determined for ourselves what our accuracy was, how well we had generalized. But this one doesn't, because we are going to submit what we think the values are, and then Kaggle is going to basically do the evaluation for us, because it knows what these are. So what we're going to do is we're going to use pandas to read the data in as a table, and we're going to do that for the training set. So you can just run this. Let's see how long it takes. Okay. And we can do this for the test set as well. So, and we can kind of see kind of this nicer view of it, but yeah, and we see how big it is. So remember that our original MNIST training set had like 60,000 training examples. Here we only have like 42, that's a little under 42,000, and um, and the 785 columns. Well, one of them is for the label, and 784 are for the image data, and there's our test set. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually load these into um, into variables for the features, the labels, so that the training features, which is like the X, and then the training labels, that's like the Y. And what I've done here is I have so basically, I'm reading in the training CSV in both cases, but I'm able to specify which columns I want to bring in. And I'm also going to tell it to convert that the data type is basically going to be a uint8, and then I'm going to convert the whole thing into a numpy array. Okay, so that's a little bit of extra bit of magic. That means that this underscore train features and labels and features are going to be numpy arrays, not pandas tables, right? So now we're back into the land of numpy, and which is kind of where we were previously, and we're ready to go explore our data set just a little bit. So again, we see the numpy arrays. We see that the data type is integer as before. We see the shapes, and again, the shapes are a little bit different here. So remember that our model wanted to see 28 by 28 by 1, and these are just single dimensions, just a flat array. But we're going to fix that. So I'm going to print out some information about them. Similar to before, the range of values looks reasonable for both the train and the test. The labels, same sort of range. We're going to plot these. So that plot helper function that we defined earlier to convert from the different image types, it was designed to kind of handle this case where we had like a flat array and needed to turn it into a three-dimensional array. And so, yeah, it looks the same as before. Histogram plot, just to the same side, looks just the same as before. We don't do one for the test set because we don't have the Y data, don't have the label data there. So we're going to convert just as before. Number of classes is still 10. Run the next cell. We see what the shapes are, but we now see we've done the reshape. Okay, so train features, that's a numpy array. Reshape is a numpy method, and we're going to reshape into this size. We're also going to normalize the feature data, the training features, and just to see what that looks like. We now, they're now floats, and they're in the range 0 to 1. So let's go and create our model. We're going to use the same model that we just built. So model is what we had created previously. We're going to evaluate it on this new data. Okay, so this is our old model, but with the new data, which we kind of should expect very similar results because it's pretty much from the same data set, although it's been kind of distributed a little differently between training and test. We can look at some predictions. And again, 100% correct. The prediction plots, again, as we expect, because this data really is pretty much the same. So, so here's where we can modify the hyperparameters as we need. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to basically stick with the previous ones. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new model. So it's basically, it's a new instance of the model that we had specified previously with the same learning rate and decay values, which I could update here, but I don't want to. I'm just fine. We're going to fit it, and then we're going to see how it does. So what you need to remember is that this new model Kaggle it's going to have seen less training data than our previous model. So we might expect that it will not do quite as well when it generalizes, because it's seen less data. And here we go. Boom. Let's go plot the history. It looks very similar to the, of course, it's the same type of model. It's built from the same description, right? And now we're going to evaluate it. No, but this one we have evaluated on the training, because we can't evaluate on the test because the test doesn't have labels. So what we have done, though, is we have used, we have used the original training data, and we still see that our new Kaggle model that we're going to use is still doing pretty good. It's 100% still. It's okay. Now, this final one is basically, so one of the issues is that, you know, for the Kaggle data set, we don't have the labels, but we can compare our two models, right? We have two model instances, one of them trained on one data set and another trained on a different MNIST data set, right? Slightly different. But we can run them side by side and then see what they say. And so we can kind of just look through here to see if there's a disagreement between these two. And it looks like our model has agreed, our two models agree on all the data that it sees here. So let's go and generate our predictions, okay? So we take our, okay, actually there's predictions for our first model and for the Kaggle model. This is the one that's going to show the difference. Okay. Okay. So, so on this data set, it found the differences between these two models that we created. There's 195 differences that it found on the test data set, or on the training data set. So it's showing 10 of these. So basically, the model predicts 7, whereas the Kaggle model predicts 4. Kind of see that. The previous model predicts 6. The Kaggle model predicts 4. So, so again, you're starting to see the differences between the model that had a bit more data to train on and saw more examples. So you can kind of look through that. Let's go and export these predictions. So the predictions we're going to export, so it's going to be in this format, where we basically have the images. Those are the images in the test set that came from Kaggle. Of course, it has the labels as old 0. We have to go and fill them in with our predictions from our Kaggle model. And so to do that, we run this, and now we see that so we have saved over the submission file, and we now see that we have put our labels in. So this is what we think each of these test images should be. And finally, we're going to submit to Kaggle. And what you need to do is you need to modify this field again. Again, you know, copy your username from that JSON file in here, and copy the key into here. You can copy it from the cell above, and I'll let you go and do that. And what I'll just do is I'm going to run mine, which I think was already Perfect, thank you. One new message. Perfect. Okay, so I'm almost done here. So if you entered in the right username and the right API key, you should be able to submit the submission CSV that we created up here to Kaggle. Okay, and what you can do is we can look at this competition, and we can look at the leaderboard. And if you're logged in, you should be able to see it. So there's the competition. This is your competitions that you're in. So yay me, I'm in the digit recognizer competition. And I think I can just go straight there. And what I can do is I can look at the leaderboard for this. And and I can even jump to my position in the leaderboard. So where am I? Ah, there we go. Your first entry. Bum, ba-dum. Okay, so I'm at about 648 place with a score that was evaluated by Kaggle of 0.99 correct, which is pretty good. Okay, so congratulations. You're now ready to explore, deeper into the Keras image classification, and also to participate in the ML challenge. A 130. Haha. Thank you. Cyber's got my back. Okay. So yes. So 12 to 1. There's a keynote, and so a 130. If you're interested in the ML competition, which is the data set will be on housing prices instead, and you're going to try to basically do kind of a linear regression on house prices. You'll be able to know how to submit to that competition, and with your Kaggle account. And so with that, if there are any other questions or comments, if you could maybe mention now. Okay. And it's 10:30, and
right on, exactly on time.
Perfect, perfect. So there we go. So I think we'll call it quits. Thanks for attending, everyone, and I wish you all the best.